At the Yi River, a man sings a farewell song and heads west to kill the king of Qin. He knows he will probably die. The man is Jing Kai. Start the Chinese story here and one modern stereotype immediately breaks. This is not a civilization born timid, obedient, and naturally built for exams. Early China looked less like a cram school and more like an honor culture. In the old Zhou world, the men who fought were hereditary warrior elites riding chariots. The word shi did not originally mean a test taker. It meant something closer to a retainer, a lower aristocrat, a man of service who could fight, speak, advise, and risk his life for reputation. Read the spring and autumn and warring state stories and you do not find quiet conformists. You find assassins, roving persuaders, court debaters, and proud men who would die for loyalty, rank, or shame. For Americans, the closer analogy is not modern East Asia, but Homeric Greece or the older Roman Republic, where honor, speech, and martial worth still felt personal. So the real question is not why Chinese people were always obedient. They were not. The real question is how a civilization of dangerous personalities became one in which ranked performance, caution before authority, and family-managed discipline came to feel normal. The short answer is politics. Over centuries, state-building taught households to survive by becoming legible, useful, and measurable. To understand modern China, you have to begin with a China that does not look modern at all. Under the Zhou order, power was tied to hereditary lineages, ritual rank, and aristocratic warfare. Elite men fought from chariots. Status was public, speech mattered, personal followers mattered, family honor mattered. Then that world began to break apart. As warfare grew larger and more brutal, the old chariot aristocracy weakened. States needed more infantry, more administrators, more tax grain, more strategic talent, and more men willing to move from one court to another. That breakdown did not immediately create obedience. It created volatility. It created argument. It created ambition without stable inheritance. This is why the age produces roaming persuaders, court debates, and rival schools of thought. Confucians argued for moral order. Mohists argued for practical statecraft and universal concern. Taoists distrusted the whole project of artificial control. Legalists asked the coldest question of all, how do you build a state strong enough to survive when everyone else is trying to swallow you? The point is not that early China lacked hierarchy. It had plenty of hierarchy. The point is that it had not yet become a civilization of quiet, standardized obedience. Even its hierarchy was still personal, martial, and unstable. That is why the early stories feel so sharp. Jing Kai is not a bureaucrat. He is a relic of an age when personal daring could still challenge the center. The old Shi class was not yet a class of exam machines. It was a class caught between aristocratic honor and political collapse, and that matters because once you see how intense, proud, and risky that world was, the modern stereotype becomes impossible. Chinese people were not born model students. They had to be remade. The great turning point is Qin. Not because Qin invented power, but because Qin found a way to strip power of personality and turn it into a system. In the 4th century BCE, Duke Shao of Qin brought in Shang Yang from Wei. Shang Yang looked at the old aristocratic world and saw waste. Too much inherited privilege, too much private loyalty, too much room for personality, local habit, and noble swagger. His answer was to change the scoreboard. Under the old order, the first question was, who was your father? Under Shang Yang, the first question became, what have you produced for the state? He reorganized territory into counties under appointed officials. He tightened household registration. He linked families to mutual responsibility. He rewarded military merit. He privileged farming and war over older noble style. He wanted a society that could be counted, taxed, mobilized, and punished on command. This is where the story stops being about national character and starts being about institutional design. Qin did not ask people to become morally deeper, it trained them to become more useful. A man rose not by displaying unique nobility but by becoming legible to the state. Land, grain, service, rank, and punishment were pulled into one administrative logic. Even the famous military promotions point in the same direction. Your value was no longer mainly personal glory. Your value was measurable output, and the system was so impersonal that it could even devour its own architect. The old story about Shang Yang's end is almost too perfect. When he later tried to flee, an innkeeper reportedly refused him lodging because he lacked the proper travel documents required by Shang Yang's own law. Whether every detail of the anecdote is polished by retelling or not, the point is unmistakable. The machine was built to outrank the man. The same logic appears again in the story of Bai Qi. Bai Qi was one of Qin's greatest generals, the victor of major campaigns including Chongping. But after his prestige grew politically inconvenient, Qin Zhao Shangwang ordered him to die. That is the part Americans often miss. A centralized system wants achievement, but it fears independent stature. It wants servants who deliver results, not heroes who stand above the ruler. That is why Qin matters so much. Qin did not simply conquer territory. It taught the state to distrust personality and reward measurable usefulness. But Qin also taught a second lesson. Pure extraction can conquer faster than it can govern. Qin unified China in 221 BCE. By 206 BCE, it was gone. That speed is one of the great facts of Chinese history. The same machinery that made Qin terrifying in war made it brittle in peace.
A state can demand roads, walls, labor, taxes, transport, military service, and constant compliance for only so long before the pressure turns back on the ruler. So later empire did not simply copy Qin in its rawest form. Han kept the administrative skeleton. It kept counties and commanderies. It kept large-scale bureaucratic rule. It kept the principle that the center outranked local aristocratic power, but it wrapped that machinery in a more durable moral language. This is the Han achievement. The empire no longer said only obey because I can punish you. It increasingly said obey because hierarchy is civilized, filial, moral, and proper. That is a much deeper form of rule. Once command is moralized, the state no longer stops at the tax office or barracks. It enters education, it enters the family, it enters the definition of a good son, a serious student, a decent official, a respectable adult. Qin built the steel frame, Han made it livable enough to last. That combination is one of the central facts behind later Chinese behavior. The decisive move was not bureaucracy alone. It was selection. If Qin and Han taught China how to rule a large population, the examination system taught Chinese families how to live inside that kind of rule. The roots go back to Han institutions, but the full ladder took shape across the Sui and Tang and then expanded dramatically under the Song. By the late imperial period, the route from county exam to provincial exam to metropolitan exam to palace exam had become one of the great engines of Chinese social life. For an American viewer, imagine the SAT, the bar exam, the federal civil service exam, and a moral catechism fused into one national ladder of prestige. Passing did not just bring bragging rights. It could bring office, legal privilege, tax advantage, protection from certain punishments, and entry into the elite. That is why study in China became more than study. It became family strategy, and this is where the old moral tales matter. Chinese school children were raised on stories like Sun Jing tying his hair to a beam so he would not fall asleep, and Su Qin pricking his thigh with an awl to stay awake. These stories may be polished by centuries of retelling, but that is exactly the point. A civilization chose to preserve them. It chose to tell children that pain in the service of advancement was admirable. The same truth appears in satire. When the Qing novelist Wu Jingzi wrote Fan Jin going nearly mad after passing the exam, the joke only worked because everybody knew the stakes were real. One result of the exam state was obvious. It selected officials. The deeper result was more important. It recruited parents. The state no longer needed to stand inside every household barking orders. Families carried the pressure inward on its behalf. They taught endurance as love. They taught conformity to form as intelligence. They taught children to fear falling off the approved ladder. This is one of the biggest reasons Chinese social pressure can feel so intimate. For centuries, the family has been the local branch office of selection. The imperial examinations were abolished in 1995, but the grammar they taught did not disappear. Modern China is not imperial China. Its economy is different. Its technology is different. Its ideology is different. But a very old pattern survived: centralized ranking, narrow ladders upward, and families treating those ladders as the difference between dignity and failure. That is why Gaokao matters so much every year. More than 10 million students enter a single national sorting ritual. The names have changed. The scholar official career is gone. But the emotional structure is familiar. Now the prize is entry into top universities, elite majors, civil service tracks, strong state firms, or strategic sectors like engineering, chips, robotics, and advanced manufacturing. And the fear on the other side is not abstract. For many Chinese families, the safety net still feels thin. Home ownership feels punishingly expensive. Competition is relentless. The socially approved exits are real, but narrow, so pressure is not merely cultural theater. It is rational behavior inside a hard system. This is why the old stories rhyme with modern classrooms. The beam and the awl become late-night test prep. The examination cell becomes the modern school desk. The family still tells the child that pain now may be the only way to secure a livable future later. And this helps explain a fact foreigners often notice without understanding. Why can China produce so many technically capable people at scale? Why so many engineers, coders, operators, applied researchers, and brutally well-drilled students? One answer is simple: a society that nationalizes ranking and then places status, marriageability, income, and homeownership on the other side of the ranking will generate extraordinary effort. America often refines narrower peaks of elite excellence. China often drills a much broader plateau of very competent, very stressed people, not because Chinese blood changed, because the scoreboard changed and then stayed in the home. Now comes the part that has to be said carefully. America is not Qin. That comparison would be sloppy. The United States is electorally contested, legally plural, and culturally different in ways that matter. But it is not free of training effects. Americans also live inside systems that shape personality through debt, credentials, and recurring obligation. Student debt is the most obvious example. It does not put a whip in your hand. It puts a spreadsheet in your head. It influences what majors feel safe, what jobs feel possible when people marry, where they move, and how much risk they can tolerate. Property tax is another example. It means even settled homeownership remains tied to ongoing obligation. You do not simply step outside the system and become sovereign on your own land. Then there is the credential maze. America does not have one imperial exam, but it still sorts aggressively through admissions, licensing, debt-financed education, prestige internships, and elite institutions. And politically, the federal administrative and executive state has grown enormously since the Roosevelt era. Again, this is not Qin. It is softer, it is more contractual, it is more fragmented, but the rhyme is real. China is an older, harsher, more explicit version of a problem modern states keep rediscovering. Once mobility and safety depend on passing the system's tests, families begin teaching themselves to love the test. That is why Americans should care. China is not only a rival, it is also a mirror. So why do Chinese people work so hard? Not because they were born obedient, not because Chinese civilization was always a civilization of silent conformity. The descendants of chariot warriors, wandering persuaders, assassins, and debaters did not become cautious because their nature changed. They changed because the incentives changed. Qin taught the state to count bodies, grain, labor, and service. Han taught command to wear moral clothing. The exam state taught families to internalize selection. Modern housing pressure, schooling pressure, and industrial competition turned that old grammar into a 21st century pressure cooker. That is the mechanism. And once you see the mechanism, the stereotype starts to look childish. China was not born this way. China was trained this way. Then the training became habit. Then the habit became family culture. Then the culture got mistaken for nature. And that is the part Americans should pay attention to. Because the most powerful systems are not the ones that shout, "We are reshaping your soul." They are the ones that quietly reorganize, reward, fear, status, and mobility until parents do the reshaping for them.